Welcome in. It is Big Ten Today. It's great to have you with us on this Friday. Dave Revson, Rick Pizzo, 6 days from football.
How far? You said 6 days.
6 days. I don't know if I reiterated that enough times.
You did. This is kind of the last unofficial Friday of summer for us. I know the calendar doesn't actually turn until the middle of September, right. But next Friday we will already be a night into football season. We'll have already had Big Ten games played here on the network on Thursday, getting ready for another one on Friday, and a full weekend on Saturday. I know we don't have any week 0 games this year. I actually kind of like it that way.
Yeah.
I like waiting until everybody is ready to go in the same 3 or 4 day span.
I'm not going to lie to you. Georgia Tech, Florida State might be a part of my weekend, though.
Okay, I'm not going to lie to you about that.
I'm fired up for some college football back on my television screen, but I'm with you. I kind of like where everyone starts on the same weekend. It has been fun in past years, and we had the games in Ireland and whatnot. But man, I'm geeked up for it, and I think we ought to talk about it.
Well, there's so many, right, intriguing storylines this year, including, I guess, the first and foremost being the fact that we have 18 schools. And we're going to see all 18 next weekend, Dave, starting Thursday night, going all the way through Sunday.
Yeah, it is our big story, that new look Big Ten. Obviously, the addition of UCLA, USC, Washington, and Oregon. Remember, no more divisions in the Big Ten. Top 2 teams play for the Big Ten title in Indy. So we're going to run through our top storylines for the upcoming season. And that's where it starts, Rick. To me, it's not just about big, though. It's about how good the Big Ten is going to be. You got 2 of the top 3 teams in the AP preseason poll, 4 of the top 9. The SEC is 4 of the top 9 as well. Notre Dame is the one team that's in there that's not in either one of the leagues. And I think this is what it's going to become. I mean, when we talk about competing at the very highest level of the sport, the Big Ten is going to be right there year in and year out. And that is part of what has me so excited. I mean, I think it's going to be cool to have these new stadiums and the new additions to the league. I mean, Autzen, Husky Stadium, the Coliseum, the Rose Bowl. It's remarkable. But to me, it's about competing for national championships, having elite teams year in and year out. And I think we're going to have that.
Well, the Power 5 is gone, right? And so now folks are referring to those leagues as the Power 4. It's really right now the Power 2. Right. It's the SEC and the Big Ten, and those are the teams and the leagues that are going to be competing for national championships. And in the first year of the 12-team playoff, those are the conferences that are going to be filling those 12 spots. It's without question that the majority of that 12-team field will come from the Big Ten and the SEC. The new additions to this league are unbelievable when you think about what Oregon has done the last couple of years and what Dan Lanning has coming back this year in Eugene. I know Washington is in a rebuild, but this is a team that played for the national title earlier in 2024. You throw USC in there. I believe they're the only underdog in week 1 from the Big Ten when they play LSU in that neutral site on Sunday. But I think if they get the quarterback play that Lincoln Riley expects from Miller Moss, this could be a team that right now is toward the bottom of the top 25 that I think could be higher than that when we get a couple of weeks in. So to your point, it's not just the quantity. It is the quality. And the quality of this league right now from top to bottom, coaches are raving about it right now. Let's hear what they have to say at the end of November. They may be singing a different song.
Right. One thing that I took away from our camp tour, and we're going to talk about this with Howard and Jerry later, is I think everyone's pretty good. Like, there were no teams that we walked away from and just kind of said, I don't know. USC, you bring up Miller Moss. I think he's going to be really good. I mean, just based on what we saw in the Holiday Bowl. To me, it's about the defense. But I think that year in and year out, USC is going to be good.
Yes.
Right. Like, I think they kind of, I know they went through some unsteady years there. I think they'll be good. UCLA, let's not sleep on UCLA. I don't know what year 1 will look like with Deshaun Foster, and we'll talk about the new coaches here in a bit. But UCLA's won 8 games 3 straight years. I mean, I feel like for some reason they're an afterthought, and people are thinking about them more in terms of basketball. This program's been on pretty solid footing here over the last few years. So I'm excited about all those additions. You mentioned the 12-team playoff. Like, I just think there's so much more intrigue.
Totally agree.
So many more teams that are going to be in the discussion. And then what's the Big Ten race going to look like? Where we're just talking about the top 2 teams. The conference hasn't released a tiebreaker yet as to how that's going to work. I'm told that they will have that ready next week, which obviously you have to have it ready because we're going to start the season. But what's that going to look like? And what are those races going to be like as we go down the stretch? I just think bigger isn't always better. But I think in this case, bigger's better.
It most certainly is. And let's not sleep on the teams that have been in this league for a long time and have been fixtures at the top of the conference race. And to me, that's Ohio State this year that comes in as the highest ranked team in the AP preseason poll, just one spot ahead of Oregon. I think both you and I believe you get to see this team in person. You look at the roster that they have coming back. You look at the fact that Michigan is maybe in a little teeny bit of a rebuild from their roster, at least on the offensive side. And all the players that came back on the defensive side for Ohio State, it is setting up to be one of those years. It seems like for Ryan Day and company, and the players are embracing it. They're all saying, listen, we came back for a couple of reasons. Number one, to beat Michigan and get a pair of gold pants. And number two, to win the national title. They're not shying away from it. And I think that they have all the pieces to do exactly that.
It was pretty interesting when we sat down with Ryan Day at camp. We had this graphic coming into the interview with him that was talking about the best win percentage this century of coaches who have coached at least 50 games in college football. And number one was Ryan Day. And so we came out and I asked him a little bit about, hey, look, I understand last 3 years haven't gone exactly how you wanted to at the end. Do you take some pride in that number? And the answer was like, no.
I could hear the one-word answer, no.
None at all. Yeah. And I think that it speaks to what we're talking about. What I love about Ryan Day, Rick, is he does not shy away from any of this. I mean, they put together this roster with a goal of winning the national championship. They don't make any bones about it. What's happened the last few years, in their eyes, is not acceptable. And I get that. That includes a year of being in the college football playoff and really being one play away from beating a great, great team in the college football playoff in Georgia. So, I guess I just look at this and say, they're making it crystal clear what defines success for them. And I don't think it's anything short of winning a national championship. The defense was phenomenal when we were there. I mean, Chip Kelly was telling us, hey, we really love our offense, particularly, the run game, offensive line. We're having trouble sometimes getting the ball back to the line of scrimmage.
They have some of the best players in the country at all three levels of that defense. Yep. When you start to think about the guys that came back, JTT, Jack Sawyer, Denzel Burke, all those guys could have been high draft picks. And then you go out and you get the best transfer portal player in the country in Caleb Downs to fill in a secondary that's already loaded. I mean, Jim Knowles has to look inside that toolbox and feel like he's kind of a mad genius already.
Yes.
Now he has all the buttons to push. And it's just going to be so fun to watch. And there is so much buildup already. It's August, 22nd, 23rd? I forget what day it is.
23rd, I believe, yes.
October 12th, everybody is already getting ready for Ohio State's trip out to Eugene, and just how seismic that can be in the Big Ten race and for the national title picture.
It's incredible to think about that game and the fact that that's a regular season game.
Regular season Big Ten game.
I know, and I think that's what's so cool when we talk about, again, kind of going back to that original point of expansion. Yeah, it's great to have 18 teams, but it's the quality of the teams. And you talk about Ohio State, and I think as we go through the top storylines, I don't think you can talk about Ohio State this year without then kind of following that up with what does Michigan look like this year. And I'm interested in your take on this. Sharon Moore, I think they have a really good team. Like, we were just there 2-3 days ago at camp, and defensively, I think they'll really be good, particularly in the interior of that defensive line. I mean, they have two of the best players in America right there, probably the best tackle tandem in the country. Offense, maybe a little bit of a work in progress, particularly at the quarterback spot. I don't think it was really clear. Alex Orji kind of feels like the guy who will end up emerging there. But I guess I'm interested in, like, when you look at it, like, what do you think Michigan needs to do this year for people to be happy, for people to feel satisfied? To me, that's the most interesting question. I'm not asking so much about within the program. I'm asking about outside the program.
I think outside the program, if this team were to come back after losing J.J. McCarthy and Blake Corum and all the other guys and be in the mix for a college playoff berth, and if they got into the college football playoff, I think this year would be a massive success. Yeah. Even if they were to lose in the first round game, even if they were to be one of the 9 through 12 seeds and had to play on the road, I think this is a massive success. Coming off the national championship of a year ago, all the tumult with Jim Harbaugh deciding to leave and then the ensuing penalty that comes along doesn't necessarily affect this program this year, but it is part of the conversation. I just find it fascinating because I don't think there's a team right there in the country right now that people are more divided on. There are half of those who clearly believe, being in the preseason top 10 in the AP top 25, that believe that this Michigan team can do it. And then there are those on the other side who believe that they are way overrated, that there are too many question marks. We're going to find out early, though, because in previous years, Michigan has had a really soft non-conference schedule.
Yeah,
it
not
is
the case
anything
this time,
but soft in 2024. We'll probably know after week 2 whether this team has a legitimate shot to be part of the college football playoff.
Honestly, I think we know a little bit week 1.
Yeah, always a tough
Fresno
out.
State's a pretty good team. I understand, like Jeff Tedford, unfortunately, had the health issue and had to step down as the head coach. We all know he's a brilliant offensive mind. But Fresno State is one of those teams that people are talking about as being one of the better group of 5 teams this year. So I don't think it's unreasonable to think that that could be a challenging game if you are not a really good team. And I think there is some uncertainty surrounding Michigan. I will just tell you, at quarterback spot, I think is a question mark right now, as we reference. Like, defensively, they're going to be really good. They're really pleased with the skill position talent. They think they have some guys who are going to emerge. Colson Loveland is
probably the best tight end in the country.
Crazy good. Yeah. Crazy good.
They also
really
need Dave. Donovan Edwards has to stay healthy.
Yeah.
They don't have the depth behind him in terms of a running back room that can make defenses scared other than Edwards. So he absolutely needs to stay healthy, I think, for Sharon Moore to have success in year 1. And it's hard to think of Sharon Moore as being a year 1 head coach, but obviously he is after all the time that he spent last year coaching this team while Jim Harbaugh was suspended. And he's not the only one, right? This is officially the first year for David Braun because he spent last year as the interim, but it certainly doesn't feel that way. There are so many first-year head coaches in the league this year, and not just because of the 4 teams that come in. Yes, Jed Fish makes the move, obviously, and Deshaun Foster as well. But there are personalities everywhere. You guys were at Indiana. I'm not sure there's a bigger personality than Curt Cignetti. And there are some first-year head coaches that have expectations of veteran head coaches that have been at places that have won national championships, and others that are still trying to earn respect. It is a great storyline for us to follow throughout the course of the year.
I think it's going to be fantastic. We just visited with Jonathan Smith earlier this week. I got to tell you, and we said this in the camp show, he gives off some D'Antonio vibes. They're very different personalities, but just in kind of the way he comports himself, right? He's an understated guy. He kind of believes in, hey, we're going to coach him up and we're going to recruit players in the kind of circumference of the Midwest, around not far from Michigan State's campus. There are tons of great players here. We're going to develop guys. A lot of it rings true with kind of what we saw from Mark D'Antonio through the years. Jed Fish, in visiting with him, I was out there this summer, and he was basically saying, this was before fall camp, but he said, I don't know what I've got.
He's been really honest about it.
I think we're pretty good, but you don't know until guys are sweating next to one another and going through practice. I know our camp tour guys, I wasn't out at that stop, but they were impressed with what they saw at Washington. I think Foster's really interesting at UCLA, a guy who has such an incredible history there. So I think there's some incredible storylines. I'm really interested in Cignetti because I think their schedule's favorable.
It is. And he's won everywhere. And there is something about confidence and it being contagious with your team.
Yeah.
But for it to be contagious, you have to win some games early, right? So I think that for Indiana, especially early on when you're playing those non-conference games, this is a team where the non-conference and a coach for the non-conference that I think may be more important those first 3 games of the season than any other program in the Big Ten, because you are trying to flip the script. You're trying to completely change the narrative within your program as well as outside the program. And if you can do that with the transfers that you brought in, some guys coming from James Madison, a new quarterback as well, then yeah, you get to 4 or 5 wins early, and suddenly the entire thought process changes. You're not, we're Indiana football again. We are coached by a guy who has taken all these programs to heights they've never seen before. Why can't we be that team?
I think they have a chance to do that. I think they have a chance
to
get off to a really good start. And to your point, Curt Cignetti, like everywhere the guy's been, he's never had a losing season in 13 years. Now, this is different. And he's got a lot of players he brought from JMU, who they're going to be counting on. This is a major step up from James Madison. I say that with all due respect to a team that has played great football and maybe made the transition from FCS to FBS as well as any team
without a question
that we have ever seen do it. But it's different. It's different playing at this level. So fascinated to see how all those
I'll say this before we close out. I host the Monday Coaches Press Conference show. I'm not sure any is going to be more entertaining each week than the press conference that Curt Cignetti holds.
You'll get some good quotes.
Yes.
You'll have some confidence that will come out.
Quotable quotes without question.
From Curt Cignetti, no question about it.
Visited in just over 3 weeks, thousands of miles traveled to get there, and who knows how much coffee consumed. It all adds up to the end of the Big Ten Network training camp tour, which came to its official conclusion earlier this week at Northwestern. After their visit with the Cats, Dave, Jerry DiNardo, and Howard Griffith put the finishing touches on yet another successful trip.
Rick, thanks. We're here at Northwestern, which is stop 18 on our tour of the Big Ten. I will say, unlike in past years, none of us saw all 18.
That's correct.
However, one of us saw each of the 18 schools. At least one of us was at each one of the schools. Is that clear?
Okay.
You were looking at me very confused.
No,
I did the math on this.
Yeah.
Right. So we can speak with some authority.
Do you have a question?
To each one of the schools. This is a long segment. All right. What was your biggest takeaway from the tour? What were the things that stood out to you the most?
Well, I started out west. So the narrative that the West Coast schools aren't as physical is untrue. I mean, part of the reason is Washington won the Joe Moore Award last year before they were in the Big Ten for the best offensive line. So there's no difference between the West Coast schools, in my opinion, and the traditional Big Ten schools at the line of scrimmage. The other thing is the quarterback position is going to be more of a determining factor on who wins the championship, who wins games, because it's not a very strong year at quarterback at all the teams that I went to see. I know the strongest quarterbacks, but there's not a lot of them, so quarterback play is going to be bigger this year than I think it has been in recent years for more schools.
Well, I think if you stay with the quarterbacks, how about the amount of portal quarterbacks that are going to ultimately be able to lead their programs opening day? That's going to be a lot different than I think a lot of fans are really accustomed to. And you watch it play out, and you watch as we go on around just how quickly these guys have been able to really acclimate themselves to the programs that they now are going to be leading. That's been a really, really interesting, and I think that's part of, what the portal has brought on. Guys have found a way to become big-time players, and whether it's taking their receivers and tight ends and running backs out to dinner, whether it's taking them south to go work out, the ability to be able to just pick up and go do what you need to do from a quarterback position because of NIL has really allowed these teams really to gel and get their guy. And first-year guys have been able to step in and play right away.
Anyone among those quarterbacks, among those first-year quarterbacks, I mean, you got to see Dylan Gabriel in person. I'm guessing he jumped out just a little bit. Would that be the one to you, the most impressive guy you saw?
He would. In fact, that whole team is as impressive as the Ohio State rosters that we have seen for the last 18 years. We used to go around and we always felt like Ohio State separated themselves from all the other schools. Even Michigan, although obviously that didn't always determine who was going to win the game. But we always felt like Ohio State was the most talented team. I would say to you, Oregon looks more like Ohio State. Matchups with Ohio State as far as talent.
Real Nebraska to me.
Yeah.
I mean, he jumps out. I mean, and obviously he still has to play games, right? But when I go and I watch players move around, I watch them and how they interact with their teammates. He was a guy that really jumped out and had a great day the day we were there.
Yeah, I would agree on him. I think through the years, we have seen a lot of really highly touted freshman quarterbacks come through the league, and it's hard to remember freshman quarterbacks really making a huge impact, right? Maybe when you're a redshirt freshman, but as a true freshman, but the way the ball comes off and then the way that he carries himself, I mean, you could absolutely see, I think their schedule is favorable there early on for him to there are games where they should out-personnel people, and even if he does make an odd mistake here or there, maybe it won't kill them. But he is one of those rare freshman quarterbacks who it looks like maybe could come in right away, start, and make a difference.
And I think he may be supported better than most of the team in that group. Like Howard and I were talking during practice, if you separate the 5 best, most talented teams in the conference, then, that next group, who shows up first. I didn't see Nebraska, but you and I talked, and as we compared notes, we thought maybe Nebraska's the next one after the top 5.
Yeah, I would say talent-wise, I'd say this too, as I've gone around, obviously you already mentioned I didn't see the West Coast teams in the summer.
But you saw them in the spring.
Yeah, saw 2 of them in the spring. But I think the the conference as a whole, when you just look at the talent as you go around, it's really close outside of the top 4 or 5. It's hard to say who's number 9, who's number 7 there. It's going to come down to quarterback play. And you mentioned it earlier. It's going to be really important for that position to be able to make plays. They're going to have to win games, to me, for some of those programs that want to take that next step.
The other interesting stop, both Michigan schools. You know, first of all, Sharon Moore taking over for Jim, trying to put his own stamp on it. But Jonathan Smith reminds me so much of Mark D'Antonio, even offensively. I mean, he seems to have the same personality. His recruiting is going to be that Midwest 300, 400-mile radius. He wants the prospects to come to camp before, just seems like a Mark D'Antonio kind of program.
I would agree 100%. Very reminiscent. He'll let his team do the talking. He's not going to be a guy who's all blustery, but really seems to fit the culture in which they have won historically. He kind of seems like the right kind of fit. I want to ask you to define a term a little bit, or at least to clarify. When you're saying the top 5, like, help people understand, what do you see? I mean, clearly Ohio State, Oregon in that top 5. Michigan, Penn State. Who's, I guess, USC in that top 5?
I think so.
Iowa?
I think those 5.
Okay,
those
so
5.
you would not put Iowa in that top group?
Talent-wise.
Okay.
I'm not saying that Iowa, it won't be the best team in the conference. I'm just saying there is a line that you draw. And with Iowa, it's mostly the quarterback situation. Okay, when you look at talent, in my opinion, when you look at talent combined with the quarterback position, I would put Iowa below those 5. Doesn't mean that I'm saying those are the 5 best teams and so on and so forth.
Okay, so let me just say this, because I wanted to make a point, but I wanted to kind of get clarification. So I didn't see Iowa. So I'll take Iowa out of it, and let's say they're 6 or whatever they are. But for me, like, of the next group of teams, of all of them that I saw, taking out the ones that we talked about that are in that elite group, of which I saw, Ohio State and Penn State, I think, kind of to the point Howard was making earlier, and to a certain extent you were making as well, you can throw all of them in a hat. And I think it's going to come down to who coaches better, who avoids turnovers, who avoids injuries. Quarterback play is a big part of it. But there just isn't a whole lot separating, if we're going to say, for argument's sake, team 6 from 18. I mean, honestly, from 18.
Correct. I absolutely agree. It's the kind of year where it's going to be quarterback play and coaching. The biggest challenge for a coach is when the people on the other sidelines have the same talent as you do. And when you lose a game like that, it's your fault. There's some games that are played that the coaches could switch sidelines, and that one team's still going to win. And we all know who they are. Right. We all know the matchups I'm talking about. Yes. But most matchups in this conference this year, in my opinion, will be quarterback and coaching.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out, we're not saying that whether that's 6 through 18 is because this is still not a strong league. This is a very strong league.
Right.
I think, but to your point, it's just one of those things where the difference is going to be play calling, talent, health. All of those things are going to have to come into play for you to maximize your opportunities and what your abilities are as a program.
And that may have always been the case. I think the reason it jumps out at me this year is there's 18 of these suckers, right? I mean, that's why it's so defined to me, because in a conference of 18 and in the sport that, in my opinion, is a have and have not sport, there's a lot of teams that are going to be equal in talent.
Yes, and I think that is really interesting. I mean, I think historically we have gone to a few camps and just said, hey, they don't have a chance. Mm-hmm. Now, have we necessarily said exactly that on the air? Maybe you tiptoe around it in the preseason, but I think we would leave there and say, this is a team that's clearly going to be in the bottom 2 or 3. I don't really necessarily feel like I came away from anywhere feeling that way this year. So kind of to your point, Howard, like, the league's pretty good. I mean, I think part of that is saying there's no one who's like, oh, my goodness, wow, they got a ton of work to do. I don't really think we have a team. Now, I might be proven wrong, but there was no one I walked away feeling that way about. And so that kind of reinforced your point, which isn't to say, like, there are some elite teams. And ultimately, you're going to be judged on how good Ohio State, Oregon.
The conference be judged.
The conference can be judged on how good those teams are. The conference was judged on Michigan winning a national championship last year. You win a national championship, it was a good year for the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. But I think what's going to be really fascinating is how many of these games are going to be really evenly matched.
I think the other thing that kind of jumped out is we're going into this new era of technology. right? The tablets on the sideline, being able to communicate with whether it's the quarterback or whether it's the linebacker defensively. It could be a couple of different positions, and fun to watch around and see really who's embracing it. Not everyone is embracing it. Some people believe we still got to do these signals. Some people are saying we're going to be, full speed ahead with that.
It's one of the few rules that have changed where the college coaches are visiting with the high school coaches. So how do you use those tablets? Well, I mean, it's trickle up. I mean, what happened?
They maybe ought to visit with the high schoolers because they know how to use the tablets. Forget the coaches, the players. But it was interesting being in Purdue. We were there on a scrimmage, and they kind of scrimmaged out or kind of did a walkthrough on here's what we would do in between series with a tablet. And they had a coordinator holding it up. They had different guys with the tablets in their hands because it is unfamiliar. How are we going to handle this? What's this going to look like logistically?
Right. I was at Iowa for 2 days, and the day before we did the practice that the show was on, they had a tablet practice. It was a light practice. It was more than a walkthrough, but they broke. They all looked at their tablets. They came back.
How about the fact you called it a tablet practice? Come on, Coach.
That's what they called it. I'm just repeating.
Yeah, a lot of things have changed. We're talking about salary caps and tablet practices. Good stuff. Been a really fun tour, as always. Fun to spend some of it with you guys, although this is the first one that the three of us and only the three of us were at. Yeah. Seems like old times. Rick?
I think this is a really tricky game for Penn State having to go on the road, but this will give us a great insight to who Penn State is right now. When you look at Drew Aller at the quarterback position, a new offensive coordinator, I think Drew will be asked to run the ball a little bit, extend some plays with his legs, and they'll be able to do that. The question will always be, when we talk about Penn State going back a couple of years now, is can they create explosive plays? Can they get back to running the ball with the consistency they had a couple of years ago? This will be really a telltale for them, and they need to find a guy who's going to be able to take the top off the defense and get those explosive plays out of the pass game. Anytime you go on the road, I think you have to be able to take a defense with you. This Penn State defense is going to be one of the best, I believe, in the country with Tom Allen, now the defensive coordinator. It'll be fun to see Abdul Carter really starting to play on the defensive line now. I'm sure he'll still be at the linebacker position in certain situations, but he's going to be a matchup problem for West Virginia up front. You don't know where he's going to line up, whether it's the right side, the left side, or over the center. He's going to create some problems. I really like the secondary matchup as well. There'll be some receivers for West Virginia that are going to be able to test the secondary of Penn State. But if Penn State can get the pass rush that they need, they'll be able to come up with some turnovers, and they'll need those turnovers to give their offense a short field.
Howard, you're the man. This is the big board. You see a couple of games on Thursday night that air right here on the Big Ten Network, another one on Friday. The Penn State-West Virginia game that Howard mentioned, one of the featured matchups on Saturday, and then it all wraps up not until Sunday night with USC and LSU. We are back, Rick Pizzo, Dave Revson, to talk about some of those games, and I do want to start where Howard started with that Penn State-West Virginia game, and I know they're going to be really good defensively. I am waiting to see what Andy Kotelnicki, the new OC, does with Drew Aller. Yes, they have the two guys back in the backfield in Singleton and Allen. And yes, they still probably have some questions to answer on the outside, finding explosive guys. But Aller has an NFL arm. I want to see it. I want to see him let loose a little bit. And I know you may not want to do that on the road against another power-type opponent, but you got to do it at some point. To me, you do it early, and you show the rest of the nation that we are willing to throw the ball around a little bit.
He threw it really well when we were there for practice. Andy Kotelnicki has an interesting offense. There's a lot of motioning there, a lot of keeping teams off balance, and I know the players really embraced it. They were enjoying it. I do think there's questions at wide receiver. They think Trey Wallace had a great camp, and so that maybe he emerges as a big-time weapon for them. We know about Julian Fleming, of course, as well. That, to me, is the big question mark, is do they have the weapons, kind of what you were talking about there. And West Virginia is the kind of team that maybe you try it on. They've got transfers in the secondary. They've got some players who they really are high on coming in. But communication, as you know, with new players, that becomes challenging. And so maybe this is a time where right away, to your point, you take some shots, but that's a challenging game. I mean, they're going to be fired
It's a tough
up.
place to play, too. If you've ever been to Morgantown,
Yeah.
like, they are not the most hospitable.
So I've not been to a
fans.
game there. Have you been there?
I have been there, and I've been
been.
to both a basketball and a football game there. And if you're on the opposing side, it's not the friendliest environment you've ever been in. But, I mean, Drew Aller has played right in the horseshoe. And,
No doubt.
and I mean, you've been there before. So, to me, I want to see if you can take the top off a little bit. I just want to see it early in the season to establish that we're going to do this over the course of the year.
And if you win that game, man, I like their schedule.
Then it changes
a
everything.
lot. I think they're in really good shape. They do have to play Ohio State, but they don't have to play Michigan. They don't have to play Oregon. Like, I think they could make a run. And look, the preseason poll has them in the top 10, so it's not unreasonable to think this is a playoff team. I think there's a lot of pressure on them to be a playoff team this year.
I do, and I think a lot of questions there at quarterback, and questions in Lincoln were answered, right, when Matt Rule said Dylan Raiola is our guy, and that makes their season opener pretty intriguing.
No doubt. I'm so excited to watch Dylan Raiola. I will say this. We've been to a million of these training camps, and I've gotten it wrong a lot. There are times where you see someone. I think it's really important to remember, like, we're parachuting in for one day.
Yeah.
And sometimes you watch someone and they have a great day or they don't have a good day, and you extrapolate that that's what the season's going to be. But there's just some intangibles, Rick, where I feel like you can tell. And Dylan Raiola just has that. The ball comes out of his hand beautifully. He has a confidence about him. I love the way their schedule lays out. I think they have a chance to, I don't want to say ease into things, but UTEP's a team that you should be able to handle in the opener. And then Colorado, who knows? I think there's a lot of pressure on Nebraska to win that game against Colorado, but I don't know. I just feel like this is if they get a couple, kind of what we were talking about, if you get a couple under your belt, they're in good position.
And
they love their receiver core.
And they have a good running back. They have a deep running back room.
Yep.
They have veterans back there. They have what should be a pretty solid offensive line. Fedoni really underrated at the tight end position. I don't know. I mean, I do think, though, you probably treat this a little bit differently than the situation I just described with Drew Aller. I don't think you want Raiola going down the field, taking all sorts of shots early. You make some safe play calls, allow him to get some confidence. But I'm with you. I think this young man has everything to be an absolute star in this league, and I think probably sooner rather than later. Hey, speaking of sooner rather than later, we're going to get to see Minnesota very early, very soon, as a matter of fact. And I think there are a lot of questions with this Gopher team. You and I, we were just talking off camera. We both think PJ Fleck is an unbelievable football coach.
Fabulous.
When it comes down to X's and O's, fundamentals, his teams are always among the least penalized in the country. They have all those boxes checked. They can run the football, we know that. But Max Brosmer is a transfer QB who comes in from UNH. It's a different level of football. I've heard various reviews from folks that have seen him throughout training camp, and their schedule is not an easy schedule. I think that PJ will get the most out of this team. I just think even against a North Carolina team that's not supposed to be great, it is a Power 4 team. You can tell a lot about how you match up with a team that I think is a little bit comparable in its own league.
Very interesting game. I love that it's at home for Minnesota. I think that helps them a lot. Brosmer, again, you parachute in for a day. Brosmer didn't have a great day the day that we were there. It was very early in camp, and I know that they're very excited about him, but he wasn't great. So I agree with you. They're going to be able to run it. Darius Taylor being healthy, if he stays healthy all year, but then they have C.A. Bangura, who they brought in from Ohio University, who they really like, and you can see why. He's a versatile guy. They have a deep backfield, and their offensive line is really good. I think, to me, the big question is they took a step back defensively last year. Like, if you look at the things that went wrong, I understand the pass game was poor a season ago, but the defense was not at the level that it had been the previous 2 years, which was really good.
Yes.
So maybe that's a little bit unfair, but that, to me, is going to be interesting. You got UNC, they got Max Johnson throwing it around, replacing Drake May, highly touted kid. So that's a really interesting one. USC and LSU is a fascinating
Last game of the weekend.
as well. It is in Vegas. I mean, you were talking about kind of, hey, Minnesota, you're playing North Carolina, maybe kind of a comparable Power 5 team. USC and LSU are somewhat comparable as well. And again, new quarterback at LSU, Jaden Daniels, isn't there anymore. So, and big sigh of relief from USC for that. But the question mark with USC is how good is the defense? you're going to find out right away against LSU.
Well, Lincoln Riley has made no bones about it. He said that my biggest move this year was not in recruiting. It was not in getting us ready to transition to the Big Ten. It was getting Dan Lin to come from UCLA to USC. And you can say everything, but you have to prove it. And USC's defense has not proven it in recent years. When you have Caleb Williams and you're scoring those points and you can't get to the spot that you want to be, then the question becomes, how do you fix the area that badly needs to be fixed? We'll see if Dan Lin is that guy. I do want to touch on Iowa because I think it's an interesting game to watch. Kirk Ferentz will be suspended along with John Budmeyer. Seth Wallace is the acting head coach. It's the first game for Tim Lester as the OC. And, oh, by the way, we haven't had an announcement yet as to whether it would be Cade McNamara or Brendan Sullivan. It's a game Iowa should still easily win, but there are a lot of questions to be answered in week one.
There are a ton of questions. I think we kind of look at this Iowa team. I look at them as a dark horse playoff team. I think they have a really favorable schedule.
They do.
You have to get better quarterback play. And the reports out of camp are that they have not gotten better quarterback play. So can you figure something out? I think Tim Lester, given his track record, it's a really good hire. But, you know, again, kind of to your point, what is this going to look like? Not necessarily in week one, but what does it look like week two against a really good Iowa State team?
And I'll say this, whoever is the quarterback in week one, I think it's a very short leash because that other guy is waiting behind, and that's a tough situation.
So those are the games to keep an eye on in week one. Of course, we'll be talking about all of them.
All of them.
Next week.
All
18. 18 games.
18 of them. Talk about. Our Walgreens Big Stat closing the curtain on the Big Ten's impact during the Summer Olympics. 356 total athletes with Big Ten ties brought home 98 medals representing 64 different nations, including the country of Nigeria, which brings us back in studio with the athlete who represented that country, former Northwestern women's basketball standout, Pallas Kunaiyi-Akpanah. We are beyond thrilled that Pallas is with us in studio to discuss that experience. Everyone that watched the Olympics said, wow, Paris delivered beyond all expectations. For someone who was actually there, can you do your best to describe what the experience was like?
I can't even describe it, put it into words. It was a beautiful, beautiful experience, a beautiful village. I thought it was crafted perfectly, and we were able to make the most out of the short time that we were there.
You talked about the village. We see you now with some pictures in Paris, and it's not just about the games that are being played, right? Yes, you being on the floor for your home country of Nigeria is one part of it, but meeting other athletes, getting to go to other venues, see other sports. What other sports did you get to enjoy?
One of the best parts for me, the most fun parts about Paris, I would say, was the pin trading. That was one of the things, like an activity that really brought a lot of athletes together because everyone's so excited to meet you and ask for your country pin. And I thought getting to participate was actually one of my favorite things to do while I was over there.
And everybody talked about the different country villages and how everybody got to get together and watch different events. What was it like for you to be part of Team Nigeria, to represent your home country, and to be able to enjoy that experience with all the other Nigerians that were there?
Wow. I mean, you have to just, in the moment, think about how hard everyone has worked to get there. I think that was one of the most surreal parts for me, was just knowing that each person I run into is the best where they're from, is the best of the best. It's just like such a surreal experience.
And a quarterfinal run for your team, what was it like on the floor?
Wow. I think the crowd was just like surreal. The crowd was electrifying. They were loud. They were cheering us on. Even when sometimes we weren't the favorite, we still had a lot of support, and that, you know, it made the moment a lot more full for me.
Let's go back to the start. You were born in Nigeria. You lived there for the first 14 or 15 years of your life. How did your basketball skills develop to the point where you ended up at a boarding school in Georgia before eventually being recruited to play college basketball at Northwestern?
Well, the journey has been such a twisting road, I would have to call it that, because it wasn't the traditional journey. Most people in this position to say they went to the Olympics, they usually have like a really, I can't even really pinpoint, but each journey is different. I think my parents actually instilled a lot of values in me from a young age and made this experience possible, for sure. And also the coaches that I have been privileged to work with over the years. You know, Coach Joe McEwen, for example, my coaches overseas, my coach in high school. I would say a lot of it just came together to bring this moment
Yeah, bring you to this point, right? Coach McEwen is here with us today as well, watching and listening. What do you remember best about your time at Evanston? Of course, we remember getting to cover you as an outstanding player with the Wildcats. What were those years like for you in college?
I think, honestly, being at college in Chicago was one of the most crucial parts of this journey. It got made a lot of a difference for my career, the way my career has progressed over the years. And being in that environment, the teamwork we had, the staff we had, the coaching staff and the support staff we had, definitely till this day, those relationships have lasted and have stayed.
And I know that you moved on to play professional basketball and are still playing professional basketball in Europe, really tough countries to live in. You've had to suffer through being in Italy and Belgium and back in Italy as well. What's that experience been like for you? I mean, you are truly a world traveler. I imagine your passport has a lot more stamps on it than most people on this planet.
Such a wonderful experience. I mean, definitely being able to travel and to see all parts of the world, get to experience different cultures, different lifestyles. I feel really blessed to have been on this path and in this journey in my career.
And I know this career continues for you. Have you given any thought to what you will tell, whether it's your children or grandchildren or other people in your family about this experience, about being able to be in the Olympics, to continue to play professional basketball, and to live a life that I think a lot of people would consider to be kind of a dream existence?
Wow. So hard to even put into words. I would say one of the biggest things about this career is it's every day. It's a constant choice you have to make to choose between one option or the other, and you have to always think of it as, where do I want to end up? And I think I really want to show people and young girls that, you are capable of these things. You are capable of being on the stage like the Olympics. Kids in Nigeria, kids in Africa can watch and see, wow, this is possible for me too.
You probably never thought, as we just showed some pictures of you being with Jimmy Fallon and Megan Rapinoe and Sue Bird, that those were going to be people at the Olympics that you were going to be standing with, taking selfies and photos with.
Well, never in a million years would I have thought I would look to my right and LeBron James is sitting right there and watching my game, and never would I have thought I would be in that position. But, it's been such a blessing, such a privilege to represent my country in that way.
Well, I know you've worked very hard to get here, and we truly appreciate your time. Hope you savor this experience for your entire life. I'm sure you will.
Thank you so much for having me.
I give you good start to the season, an amazing start to a career. Wisconsin's season opener in men's soccer, 4-0 win over Marist, the Red Foxes, for those who are curious. How about freshman Dean Bolts? 3 goals and an assist, the hat trick and 4-point night in your first time on the pitch.
Somewhere Rick Smits is heartbroken.
Oh,
look who's
deep
back
pull.
in State College yesterday. One of the all-time Nittany Lions soccer greats, 2-time first-team All-American Ali Krieger, Olympian, World Cup champ. Watched the third-ranked Nittany Lions drop a tough one to Virginia, 2-1. This after they beat number 8 Texas Tech 4-0 in their season opener. Rick, if all goes well, the Big Ten will be playing football starting next Thursday until January the 20th. So this becomes the last weekend without Big Ten football until, one would hope, January the 20th. What will you do?
Well, I'll be sitting here next Friday talking about those Thursday night games.
I'm asking you about this weekend. How are you going to pass the time without football?
You have one answer, and it's 4 letters long. It's called golf. Because after this weekend,
yes,
I am one of those guys, I don't even want to see the clubs. So they come out of the trunk, they go into the basement, and I say, I'll see you again in April.
So you chase the little white ball down the fairway. I will chase mine into the rough and behind trees, right?
Fair.
Yours is...
Yeah, but you get a longer walk, a little bit more exercise.
It sounds like a good way to spend the weekend. We hope you enjoy your last weekend without Big Ten football, but we want to give you a little bit of a taste of it on the way out. This is the sights and sounds of our campus tour. 18 stops down. We got football next week. Can't wait to talk about it with you all week on the Big Ten Network.